The first thing I noticed when I stepped onto that cracked, overgrown pathway was the silence. Not the normal kind you hear late at night, but a heavy, breath-holding kind of quiet that makes you feel like the world is waiting for something to happen. My flashlight flickered as if it didn't want to be there either, and for a moment I thought about turning back. But I had made a promise, to myself, to my viewers, and honestly, to the part of me that wanted to know what really happens inside a place people avoid even in daylight. People in my town always talked about the abandoned place at the edge of the old forest. They called it a warehouse, but others claimed it used to be some kind of research building, long before everything shut down. Kids dared each other to go near it, but no one ever stayed longer than a few minutes. They said the structure was unsafe, the wind made strange noises, and that being alone there until midnight was impossible. The moment the sun dipped, something inside the place made people run. No one could explain what it was, and no one wanted to. But that mystery was exactly why I was there. I kept walking, feeling the cold air settle against my skin, sharper than it had been outside the fence. It was like the temperature dropped as soon as you stepped inside the boundary, as if the building breathed out a chill of its own. My camera hung around my neck, already recording. I wanted everything, the sounds, my reactions, the atmosphere, to be real. No acting, no dramatics. Just me, alone in the abandoned place until midnight, trying to understand why so many people had stories about it. The building came into view slowly, like it was rising out of the darkness. Half of the roof was caved in. The windows were either missing or covered in dust, and vines crawled across the cracked concrete walls, gripping them like fingers. For a second, I stood there just taking it in, trying to imagine what it used to look like when it wasn't swallowed by time. I stepped inside through a rusted doorway, the metal groaning softly when I pushed it. The air smelled old, like damp wood and forgotten memories. My footsteps echoed lightly as I moved deeper into the first room. Paint peeled off the walls in long strips, and a few broken tables lay scattered, as if people had rushed out one day and never returned. I told myself it was just a building, nothing more. But a part of me couldn't ignore the strange tension I felt, like the place didn't want me there. I checked my watch, 10:07 p.m., almost 2 hours to go. I kept reminding myself that this was supposed to be a simple exploration video, something to test my courage and share an experience people were curious about. My viewers loved suspense, and this abandoned place had been requested more times than I could count. So here I was, alone, staying until midnight, documenting everything. Every sound felt louder in the empty hallway. When a piece of debris shifted under my shoe, it echoed like a warning. My flashlight's beam cut through the dust-filled air, landing on an old staircase that led to the second floor. The railing was partly broken, but the steps looked strong enough. I hesitated, then started climbing, each step creaking faintly as if announcing my presence. The upper floor was darker, the windows boarded up almost completely. I swept my light around, revealing old shelves, scattered papers, and a long corridor stretching into blackness. The walls had strange marks on them, nothing threatening, just random scratches and faded writing that time had erased. I tried reading a few words, but couldn't make out anything useful. Then, my flashlight caught something that made me pause. At the far end of the hallway, one door was slightly open. Not wide, just enough to show the tiniest sliver of darkness inside. It wasn't the door itself that bothered me, but the feeling that it had recently moved. I stood still, listening. Nothing. Only silence. I slowly walked toward it, each step measured, my heartbeat louder than any sound in the building. The air grew cooler the closer I got, enough that I could see my breath faintly in the beam of my flashlight. I told myself it was just because the upper floor had no insulation, nothing more. But the uneasy feeling in my chest didn't go away. When I reached the door, I gently pushed it open. The room inside was small, maybe an old office. A single chair lay on its side, and papers were scattered across the floor. My light landed on a dusty glass window with cracks spreading through it like spiderwebs. Nothing strange. Nothing dangerous. Just another room. But then I noticed something that made my throat tighten. In the dust on the floor, near the center of the room, there were footprints. Not mine. Not old. They were recent, clear impressions leading toward the back corner of a room and stopping right in front of the wall. I stepped back without meaning to. My camera caught the shaky movement as I exhaled slowly. For a moment, my mind tried to make sense of it. Maybe someone else had been here earlier. Maybe a worker or a local kid. It didn't mean someone was still inside with me. I knelt down to look closer. The footprints were small, almost too clean, like whoever made them hadn't walked through the rest of the dusty hallway. That didn't make sense. No matter how I tried to explain it, something felt off. I checked my watch again. 10:34 p.m. Still a long way until midnight. I stepped out of the room, forcing myself to stay calm, reminding myself that fear can twist simple things into something bigger. I walked back down the hallway, this time noticing small details I had missed. The way the wind outside made faint tapping sounds on the broken panels, the slight hum of my camera, the soft crunch of dust under my boots. But then something changed. From downstairs, somewhere in the darkness below, I heard a faint sound. Not loud, not threatening, just a small, unmistakable noise. A single footstep. Slow, deliberate, and definitely not mine. I froze where I stood, the air suddenly colder, the entire building feeling tighter around me. My hand tightened around my flashlight, and my heartbeat thudded in my ears as I listened carefully. Another step. This time closer. And that's when I realized something I hadn't considered before. I had entered the abandoned place alone. But I might not be alone anymore. Whether it was a person, an animal, or something else entirely, I couldn't tell. But the sound was real. And if someone or something was moving inside this place with me, midnight suddenly felt very far away. I took a step back slowly, trying not to make noise. And then the sound came again. This time, right at the bottom of the stairs. I lifted my flashlight toward the staircase, the beam trembling slightly. And what I saw next, I still don't know how to explain. But I knew one thing for sure. Leaving this place was not going to be as easy as entering it. For a long second, nothing moved at the bottom of the stairs. My flashlight beam shook slightly, but the space below stayed still, almost too still, as if the building had decided to hold its breath again. I leaned forward a little, not daring to take a step, trying to see if anything shifted in the shadows. The darkness seemed thicker there, like it pressed against the walls and pooled around the base of the staircase. I told myself it could have been debris falling, or maybe an animal pushing something aside. Old buildings like this attract all kinds of small creatures. But the sound I heard didn't match that. It had weight, timing, intention. It sounded like someone putting their foot down carefully, testing the floor. I had replayed it in my mind several times already, and each time it sounded more and more like a real step. I forced my breathing to stay steady as I waited for another sound. But nothing came. I lowered the flashlight slightly, unsure what I should do. A part of me wanted to stay exactly where I was. Another part of me, the part that had brought me here, whispered that turning away now would mean giving up on understanding what was happening. I wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. I stepped back slowly, just to get my heartbeat under control. The wooden floor creaked softly under my shoe, making me wince even though the sound was barely noticeable. I didn't want to alert whatever or whoever was downstairs. I knew that was probably just fear messing with me, but I couldn't help it. I reached the wall and leaned against it, letting the cold surface press through my jacket. I took one long breath and tried to think clearly. Before coming here, I had looked up everything I could find about this abandoned place. Old articles, rumors, stories people shared online. But most of it was vague, filled with exaggerations or missing details. The only thing everyone agreed on was that strange things happened when you stayed inside after dark. Not dangerous things, just unexplainable ones. Some people said they heard voices when no one else was around. Others felt like they were being watched even though they never actually saw anyone. A few mentioned hearing footsteps. Slow ones. Careful ones. Just like the ones I heard. I remember thinking those stories were probably drama added for attention. But standing there, alone in that hallway, I wasn't so sure anymore. I pushed myself away from the wall and took a few steps toward the staircase, moving as quietly as I could. The floorboards groaned lightly, but the sound felt tiny compared to the silence around me. When I reached the top of the stairs, I stopped again and angled my flashlight downward carefully. Still nothing. But the air felt different, like something had changed in the few seconds I looked away. A small gust of cold drifted upward, brushing past my face. It felt like someone had opened a door somewhere nearby, letting in a pocket of chilled air. I swept the beam left and right, but I couldn't see any open door or broken window from here. My fingers tightened around the flashlight, and I finally spoke out loud, barely above a whisper, "Hello." My voice bounced back to me, thin and shaky. No answer. I didn't know what I expected. Maybe a person responding. Maybe silence. But I didn't expect the faint, almost quiet shifting sound that followed my words, like something adjusting its weight. It wasn't exactly threatening, but it wasn't comforting either. It felt like someone, or something, was reacting to my presence. I swallowed hard and slowly took a step down the staircase. The wood creaked softly. I paused. Nothing. I stepped again. Still nothing. Whatever had made that sound wasn't moving anymore. Halfway down, I stopped, wanting a better angle of the lower floor. I slowly leaned over the railing to shine my light deeper into the entry area. Dust floated in the beam like tiny, drifting specks, but the rest of the space remained untouched. Then I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Near the far wall, behind a broken wooden pallet, there was a dark mark on the floor. A smear, maybe, or a faded stain. I wasn't sure. My flashlight wasn't strong enough from here to tell exactly what it was, but it didn't look like normal dirt or wood rot. It looked placed, almost like someone had dragged something across the floor long ago. I hesitated at the bottom of the stairs, not wanting to startle myself with assumptions. I reminded myself that old buildings develop weird marks all the time. It didn't have to mean anything, but something about the shape stuck in my mind. As I stepped off the staircase, the temperature dipped again. I rubbed my arms, feeling goosebumps rise even through my jacket. The air smelled slightly different now, less dusty, more like old metal or damp concrete. Something subtle had changed, even if I couldn't pinpoint it. I moved toward the mark on the floor, walking slowly, steadying my breath. The beam of my flashlight grew dimmer as I approached the far wall, and for a second I thought the batteries were dying. I tapped the handle gently, and the light strengthened again. It was probably just the wiring inside. When I got close enough to the mark, I crouched down and looked at it carefully. It was old, but it wasn't random. It curved slightly, almost like a semicircle, though time had blurred its edges. It didn't make me think of anything specific, but I didn't like how unnatural it looked in the middle of an otherwise empty floor. Just as I leaned in a little closer, a faint clicking sound echoed behind me. I snapped my head up immediately. The sound came from upstairs, the same floor I had just been on. It wasn't loud, but it wasn't subtle either. A purposeful click, like someone stepping on a piece of debris or tapping their foot lightly. The kind of sound that could only be made by something solid. I stood up quickly, my heart racing again. I turned my flashlight toward the staircase, but by the time the beam reached the top, everything looked exactly as before, quiet, still empty. But something was up there. I was sure of it now. Something had waited until I walked downstairs. Something that moved when I moved. I felt the urge to call out again, but the words froze in my throat this time. Instead, I scanned the upper floor carefully, inch by inch, letting the flashlight linger in the spots where the shadows gathered thicker. A soft thump followed. Not loud, not heavy, just enough to tell me I wasn't imagining anything. I slowly backed away from the staircase, instinct pulling me into the corner of the room, where I could see most of the lower floor and part of the upper railing. My breath felt shallow, and my palms grew damp around the flashlight and camera. I checked my watch again. 10:51 p.m. Time was moving too slowly. It felt like an hour had passed, but barely any minutes had gone by. Midnight wasn't just a goal anymore. It felt like some finish line I needed to reach. Some invisible boundary. And I didn't understand why the idea of reaching midnight mattered so much, but it felt important. Like everything happening in this place revolved around that time. The stories I had read before coming here came rushing back. People talked about strange patterns, odd noises, feeling watched, feeling like something followed them around the building. None of them could describe what they felt exactly. It wasn't dangerous, they said, just unsettling. I understood that word differently now. Unsettling wasn't when something scared you outright. It was when everything in your body felt like it was preparing for something you couldn't see. I stepped away from the corner and walked toward the center of the room again. The flashlight beam kept jittering slightly, either because my hand shook or because the air felt heavier. I couldn't tell anymore. I looked up the staircase again, trying to steady my nerves. The second floor remained dark, completely silent now. Too silent. Then a thought hit me. The footprints upstairs. The ones in the dust. They had stopped at the back wall. There were no footprints leading into the hallway. No trail going back out. No smudges crossing the dusty floor. Just a set of prints that ended at a place where there was no doorway, no hidden opening, no loose panel. I had assumed it was strange. But now, with the sounds echoing from upstairs, it felt like a warning I didn't understand. I held my breath as the old building creaked lightly again, not from wind, not from shifting beams, but from weight. Real weight. Placed carefully, slowly. Something was moving up there. Not constantly, not quickly, just waiting. I stepped back, keeping my eyes on the staircase. The flashlight flickered once more. And then from the darkness above, I heard breathing. Soft. Steady. Not mine. I froze completely. And the worst part was how familiar the rhythm of it felt. It sounded like someone trying not to be heard. The breathing stayed steady for a few seconds, almost blending into the darkness, and I felt every muscle in my body tighten at once. It didn't sound angry or threatening. It sounded controlled, like someone trying to keep calm, or someone trying not to be noticed. I lowered my flashlight slightly, afraid that if I moved too fast, whatever was up there would stop hiding and step fully into view. I didn't know which was worse, seeing it or not seeing it. I tried to slow my own breathing so I could hear more clearly. The building around me felt even colder, like something had shifted deep inside its walls. For a moment, I wondered if this was the real reason people avoided staying until midnight. Maybe it wasn't about danger. Maybe it was about that feeling that someone was sharing the space with you even when you couldn't see them. I forced myself to take one step backward, then another. The floor groaned, and the breathing upstairs paused. Just for a second. Then it picked up again, only this time it sounded slightly closer. I didn't run. I don't know why. I guess part of me wanted answers more than safety. I kept reminding myself that maybe it was just another person. Maybe someone else had heard rumors about this place and came here the same night. Maybe they didn't know I was inside when they entered. But that idea didn't sit right. No normal person stands in the dark trying to breathe quietly while someone else explores the building. I stepped into the next room off the main hall, mostly to give myself a moment to think. The room was larger and more open, with overturned cabinets and broken furniture scattered around. The paint on the walls was stripped away in long streaks, revealing the bare concrete beneath. It was the kind of room that looked like it used to be important, maybe an office or storage area. I turned off my flashlight for a few seconds and let my eyes adjust to the faint moonlight coming through a high, narrow window. Being in the dim light made me feel less exposed. But it also made every shadow look deeper, more stretched. I switched the flashlight back on and walked toward a fallen metal locker. When I moved it slightly, a thin cloud of dust rose into the air, drifting slowly through the beam of light. I crouched beside it, trying to clear my head. I kept thinking about the footprints upstairs, how the trail ended at that wall. The way the air felt different as soon as I entered. The strange marks on the floor. And now the sound of breathing that didn't belong to me. The main conflict was becoming clear. I had come here to challenge a rumor, to stay until midnight and show there was nothing to be afraid of. But I wasn't expecting this sense that something inside the abandoned place was reacting to me, following me, waiting for me to make the wrong move. Whatever was upstairs wasn't random. It wasn't an accident. It felt intentional, like something inside the building didn't want to be disturbed. I sat there quietly, listening to the creaks and settling sounds of the old structure. Then, from deeper inside the building, not upstairs this time, came another soft sound. A faint metallic scrape, like something sliding gently across the floor. This time it came from the far right corner of the building, near the old hallway I hadn't explored yet. The tension inside the place seemed to stretch in two different directions now. One presence upstairs, another somewhere deeper in the dark halls. Or maybe it was the same thing moving faster than I realized. I stood again, my flashlight trembling slightly. I slowly approached the hallway, letting the light sweep across the walls. The corridor was narrow, lined with empty frames where doors used to be, and the air smelled mustier here. Something about the darkness felt thicker, heavier. Halfway down the hall, I found a door that was still attached to its hinges, though it hung crookedly. I nudged it open, careful not to make too much noise. Inside was a small room with shelves nailed to the wall. Most were empty, but one shelf had a stack of papers curled with age. I picked up one page carefully and held it under the flashlight. The text was faded, nearly unreadable, but I could make out a few words, dates, numbers, and something that looked like a name or initial. It didn't tell me much, but the fact that paperwork still existed here meant the stories about this place once being a research building might be true after all. I put the page down and took another look around. The room wasn't special, nothing strange in here, but the building felt like it was pulling me deeper, as if each room offered just enough clues to keep me moving forward. I stepped back into the hallway and continued until I reached another open space, maybe an old break room or storage area. The ceiling had collapsed in one corner, leaving a pile of broken boards and shattered tiles on the ground. My flashlight reflected off something metallic in the rubble. I knelt down and brushed away some dust, revealing a small canister or container of some kind, rusted and dented. It looked industrial, not personal. Maybe something the workers used before the place shut down. I didn't touch it again. Something about it felt out of place, almost preserved despite the collapse around it. Suddenly, a soft sound came from behind me. I turned quickly, expecting to see someone in the hall, but it was empty. Only the flickering shadows shifted on the walls. But the sound had been right behind me, a small tap or step like someone had leaned forward just enough to test the ground. I swallowed hard and forced myself to take slow, steady breaths. I needed to stay calm. The last thing I wanted was to panic and run blindly through the dark. I moved back toward the hallway entrance, glancing behind me every few seconds. I didn't know if something was following me or if the building was simply making me imagine things. But the fear didn't feel imagined. It felt precise, like each sound was placed there intentionally. Back in the main hall, I stopped again. The staircase was still in sight, shadows gathered under the railing. Nothing moved. No breathing this time. But I didn't trust the silence anymore. I checked my watch. 11:14 p.m. Time was still moving, painfully slowly. Every minute felt stretched, as if the building wanted to trap me in each second. I wondered if anyone else who tried staying until midnight had felt the same thing, this strange pressure, this feeling of invisible eyes watching closely, waiting for something specific to happen. Then, as I turned slowly, I noticed something on the ground near the base of the stairs. A faint line drawn through the dust, thin but clear, like someone had dragged a finger across the floor. It wasn't there earlier. I was sure of it. I had walked past that spot several times. The line curved slightly, almost like it was pointing toward the far left door that led into another wing of the building. My chest tightened. Who, or what left that mark? And why was it directing me toward that part of the building? I raised the flashlight and aimed it at the doorway. Darkness poured through it like water, deeper than the other rooms I had explored. Even from here, the air coming from the left wing felt colder. I took a slow step toward it, then stopped. A memory hit me, something I read online before coming here. A short post, barely a few lines, from someone who claimed they'd tried staying inside the building once. They wrote that the left wing felt different, that the air felt heavy there, and the noise sounded strange, like the building whispered through the walls. They said they turned back before reaching the end of the hallway. I hadn't believed it then. But standing there now, looking into the gloom, I understood exactly what they meant. The left wing felt wrong, but it also felt important, as if whatever was moving inside this place wanted me to go there, or needed me to. I took another step toward the doorway, heartbeat pounding in my ears, flashlight trembling. And then, from somewhere deep inside that wing, came a soft, low sound. Not footsteps this time. Not breathing. Something slower. A quiet, dragging noise, like someone gently pulling something across the floor. I froze completely, the cold air tightening around me, as if the whole building leaned in to listen with me. Something was waiting in the dark, and I knew I was going to have to go in, whether I wanted to or not. The dragging sound continued for a few seconds, slow and steady, then faded into the darkness like it had never happened. I stood completely still, barely breathing, afraid that even shifting my weight would draw whatever made that noise closer. The left wing felt like a different world, colder, darker, heavier, as if the rest of the building had been warning me not to go near it from the very beginning. But the thin trail in the dust pointed directly toward that doorway, and the sound had come from deep inside it. Whatever was moving inside the abandoned place clearly wanted me there, or at least expected me to follow. I tightened my grip on the flashlight and took a careful step toward the entrance. The dust on the floor whispered under my shoes. I paused again, listening. Only silence waited ahead, thick and still. It made my stomach twist, but something inside me pushed me forward. Curiosity, fear, determination. I couldn't tell which one was winning anymore. They were all tangled together. The doorway into the left wing felt colder than the rest of the building, like walking through a thin sheet of ice. The air changed immediately, and a faint metallic smell drifted through the hallway. My flashlight cut through the darkness, but barely illuminated more than a few feet ahead. The walls on either side were cracked, and old pipes ran along the ceiling like veins. As I walked deeper inside, I heard a soft, rhythmic tapping, like something hitting the wall gently, then stopping, then starting again, always just far enough away that I couldn't pinpoint where it was coming from. The tapping didn't sound like someone trying to scare me. It sounded more like a signal, a pattern, almost like a heartbeat that didn't belong to me. I swallowed and pushed forward. A few steps later, I noticed something strange on the right side of the hall. A door that was half open, with a faint glow spilling out from inside. Not bright, not warm, more like the reflection of moonlight bouncing off something metallic. I stopped outside the door and leaned in slowly. The room inside was small, maybe an old storage place or equipment area. The glow came from a piece of broken glass on the floor that reflected the little light coming from the window near the ceiling. I stepped inside carefully, scanning the corners. At first, the room looked empty. Dusty shelves, a toppled chair, a small cabinet door hanging open. But then my flashlight landed on something I hadn't noticed. A set of faint marks on the floor, almost like streaks made by something being dragged across the concrete recently. They led from one corner toward the doorway. I crouched down to look closer. The marks weren't deep, but they were fresh enough to stand out in the dust. They weren't random either. They curved, looped, then went straight, as if whatever made them had changed direction suddenly. My mind raced with possibilities, none of them comforting. Behind me, the tapping sound stopped. Then the building went completely silent. Too silent. I stood slowly and stepped back into the hallway. The air here felt colder than before, and a faint vibration hummed through the floor, like deep machinery running beneath the building. But I knew there was nothing alive in this place. No power, no systems, nothing that should make a steady vibration like that. I took a few more steps down the hall. The tapping didn't return, but instead a soft whisper of air brushed past my ear. I spun around, but the hallway behind me was empty. The cold breeze didn't match the stale air of the abandoned place. It felt deliberate, like something had moved past me. My breathing grew uneven as I listened, trying to pick up even the smallest noise. For a moment, the tension eased and everything felt still. But that stillness didn't bring comfort. It made me feel like the building was watching, waiting. Ahead of me, the hallway opened into a wider chamber. My flashlight hit a large metal object to the left, an old control panel covered in dust and cobwebs. Its buttons were worn, labels faded, and wires hung uselessly from beneath it. Whatever this place had been, this room seemed important. On the far wall was a boarded-up window with moonlight squeezing through the cracks, drawing long lines across the floor. In the middle of the room stood a table knocked onto its side, with old papers spread around it as if someone had once searched through them. But something else caught my attention. Near the back wall, I saw what looked like another set of footprints in the dust. Not the same ones from upstairs, these were different. They were slightly deeper, as if whoever made them carried more weight. And they led straight toward a door in the back corner. This door was different from all the others I'd seen. It was metal, heavier, with a rusted handle and a small square window near the top, clouded with grime. It looked like it belonged in a place that needed real security. I approached slowly, unsure if I wanted to open it or stay as far away as possible. My heartbeat hammered in my ears as I reached for the handle. I hesitated. The cold from the doorway seeped through the metal, chilling my fingers. Suddenly, from behind the door, a soft, rhythmic thud echoed. Not loud, not aggressive, but steady, like someone tapping lightly from the other side. The same pattern I had heard earlier. My breath caught in my throat. I stepped back instinctively, shining the flashlight on the fog window. I strained to see anything through the dirty glass, but only shadows moved on the other side. Faint, slow, shifting. I didn't know if they were real or if my mind was trying to make sense of the darkness. I took another slow step back. Then the tapping stopped. The silence that followed felt heavier than before, sinking into the room like thick fog. I turned my flashlight toward the control panel again, hoping for some clue. That's when I noticed something I'd missed earlier. 2 wires freshly snapped near the bottom, as if someone had pulled on them recently. The dust around them was disturbed. Someone had been here. Maybe not long ago. Maybe still inside. The thought twisted my stomach. I felt the urge to run, but I knew if I left now, I'd never know what was happening inside this place. And I needed answers. The abandoned building, the strange footprints, the dragging noises, the breathing upstairs, all of it felt connected, like pieces of a puzzle that were slowly revealing a bigger picture. I moved toward the metal door again. I didn't touch it this time. I just listened. The air on this side felt cold and sharp, like it leaked from somewhere deep underground. Then, before I could react, a sudden loud thump slammed against the other side of the metal door. The whole room shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. The flashlight slipped slightly in my hand. Another thump hit, harder this time, vibrating through the door. Whatever was behind it was pushing, testing, or trying to get through. I stumbled backward, heart racing, nearly tripping over the overturned table. I stared at the door, frozen. The handle twitched. Once. Then again, harder. Something was trying to open it. My breath hitched. The handle turned slowly. And just when it reached the halfway point, a sudden, sharp sound echoed from the hallway behind me. A voice. Not loud. Not clear. Just one single word. Whispered like someone standing inches from my ear. Wait. The moment I pulled my hand away from that cold concrete wall, it felt like the entire building shifted its attention toward me. Not physically, just something in the air, something heavy. Like the abandoned place had been quietly listening this whole time, and now decided to lean in a little closer. I kept the flashlight low, trying not to shake it too much, but the beam trembled anyway. Every tiny sound echoed, my footsteps, my breathing, even the fabric of my jacket brushing against itself. It all blended into a strange rhythm that didn't feel like it belonged to me anymore. Then that second noise came again. Not a growl, not a voice, just something moving lightly across the floor somewhere behind me. A slow drag, a shift, a small sound that didn't mean anything on its own, but inside an abandoned building like this, at this hour, It carried too much meaning. It made me turn around faster than I should have, the flashlight beam swinging left, right up the broken staircase, across the peeling walls. But nothing moved. Nothing changed. Yet I still felt that presence, quiet, patient, watching. I took a few slow steps forward, telling myself it was only the wind, or a fallen piece of plaster shifting from earlier. Maybe even a rat. Anything normal. Anything that wouldn't make me rethink my entire decision to stay here until midnight. I kept reminding myself why I was here, documenting the place, collecting real footage, trying to understand why people claimed they heard strange sounds and saw shadows they couldn't explain. It wasn't supposed to be dangerous, just unsettling, just mysterious. But now it felt like the place was responding to me more directly, almost like it didn't want me here. And yet, I kept moving deeper, because something about the unanswered questions pulled me forward more strongly than fear held me back. Near the end of the hallway, I noticed something new, something I swear wasn't there earlier. A narrow door half open, with faint light flickering inside. Not bright light, just a dim pulse, like a candle struggling to stay alive or a reflection bouncing off something metallic. I remembered passing this hallway before, and the door had been closed, completely shut. I was sure of it. I took a few steps toward it, slower this time, trying to control my breathing. The abandoned place had many rooms, but this one suddenly felt different, like it had been waiting for me to notice it. As I approached, the air around the door grew cooler, almost like there was a temperature drop inside that small space. The kind you feel when you open a freezer and the cold air hits you all at once. My fingers tingled, and for a moment, I considered turning back. The smart part of me whispered, "Don't push it. Not yet." But the curious part, the part that wanted to understand what was happening, pushed me just a little closer. Before I could reach the door, something happened that made me freeze completely. The flickering light inside stopped. Not faded. Not dimmed. Stopped. Like someone had pinched it out or turned off a switch. And then, immediately after the darkness settled, I heard a soft tapping on the floor inside the room. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. It was small. Deliberate. Like fingertips gently knocking on wood. 3 taps. Slow. Evenly spaced. I didn't open the door. I didn't step back either. I just stood there, caught between fear and something else, something like a strange pull that made me feel like the abandoned place wasn't just reacting to me, but trying to communicate. My mind raced through possibilities, an animal, the pipes, old boards contracting with temperature change. But none of those made sense with the timing. Not with the light turning off exactly when I reached the door. Not with the tapping that felt too precise. I finally spoke, my voice soft, barely above a whisper. "Hello? Is someone in there?" No answer. No movement. Just the cold air seeping through the small gap in the door. I waited a long second, then gently pushed the door with 2 fingers. It creaked open slightly, but the room inside was too dark to make out anything clearly. My flashlight beam shook as I lifted it, shining it into the corner first, then sweeping across the cracked tiles. And then suddenly, something on the ground caught the light, a small metal object lying near the wall. I stepped inside, cautiously, my ears still tuned to any sound behind me. When I reached the object, I crouched down slowly. It was a key. Old, heavy, the kind that belonged to something that hadn't been opened in years. Maybe decades. It felt cold in my hand, colder than everything else around it. I had no idea what it belonged to, but something told me it wasn't here by accident. As I held the key, another sound echoed from the hallway behind me. This time it wasn't tapping. It wasn't dragging. It was a single sharp inhale, quick, sudden, as if someone had just caught their breath after seeing something unexpected. I didn't turn around right away. I couldn't. My body refused. The abandoned place felt different now. Heavier, darker, more aware. I kept the key in my hand, holding it tightly, my mind trying to convince itself that I was alone. Completely alone. But that breath, that tiny, startled sound, it didn't come from me. I finally turned around, slowly, expecting to see something or someone in the doorway. But the hallway was empty. Still. Silent. Except for one small detail that sent a quiet jolt through me. The door I had pushed open was now slightly more open than before, not because I moved it, but because something else might have touched it afterward. I stepped back into the hallway, keeping my flashlight low, listening carefully. Then I noticed something new on the floor, right in the center of the hallway. A faint trail of dust, disturbed in a pattern that led away from the room. Not footprints. Not clear marks. Just a subtle drag, like someone had lightly brushed their hand across the floor while moving. The trail went deeper into the abandoned place, further than I had explored. And that's when the feeling hit me, not just fear, but something sharper, something more focused. The key in my hand wasn't random. The open door wasn't an accident. The sounds weren't coincidences. Someone or something was guiding me. Not chasing. Not threatening. Guiding. And the terrifying part was that I didn't know whether it wanted me to discover something important or walk straight into something I wasn't supposed to survive. I tightened my grip on the key, took a small step forward, and followed the faint trail into the darker part of the building, not knowing what waited ahead, but aware now, more than ever, that I wasn't wandering alone anymore. Something was leading the way, and it wasn't done with me yet. I followed the faint trail through the narrow hallway, the old key still cold in my hand. The deeper I went, the more the abandoned place seemed to fold in around me, like it had been hiding its real shape until now. The air felt heavier, but not in a threatening way, more like the building had something it needed me to see. The echoes of my own footsteps bounced back at strange angles, as if the walls were shifting just enough to confuse the sound. The trail finally led me to a door at the far end of the corridor. It was bigger than the others, thicker, almost like it belonged to an old storage room or maybe a basement entrance. The lock on it looked ancient, covered in dust except for the center where the metal shone clean, as if someone had recently touched it. My hand tightened around the key. For a moment, I hesitated, wondering if this was what everything had been guiding me toward. Every sound, every flicker, every tiny shift in the shadows, it all seemed to point here. I slid the key into the lock. It fit perfectly, and when I turned it, the mechanism clicked with a sound far too smooth for something that hadn't been used in years. The moment the lock released, a soft rush of air slipped out from behind the door, carrying a faint smell of old paper, dust, and something else. Something like forgotten memories. When I pushed the door open, my flashlight revealed a small room, surprisingly neat compared to the rest of the building. Shelves lined the walls, holding old files, tools, and metal boxes. In the center of the room stood a wooden table, and on it lay a single journal, open to a page as if waiting for someone to read it. I stepped closer. The handwriting was shaky but clear. It talked about the building's last caretaker, someone who stayed long after everyone else left. He wrote about strange noises, about feeling watched, about doors opening on their own. But then the tone changed. He wrote about a presence in the building, not harmful, just lonely. A presence that didn't want to frighten people, only guide them, the same way it was guiding me now. Before I could flip the page, I heard that soft tapping sound again, 3 gentle taps, exactly the same rhythm as before. But this time, it came from behind me. Slowly, I turned around. Standing just a few feet away was a faint outline, not a figure and not a shadow. It was more like a soft blur in the air, shaped by the dim glow coming through the cracks in the wall. It didn't move forward. It didn't reach out. It just stood there, quiet, patient. The air around it felt strangely calm, as if whatever stood there wasn't trying to scare me at all. "Were you the one guiding me?" I asked quietly. There was no voice, no words, but the blur shifted slightly, almost like a nod. The journal, the open door, the key, all of it suddenly made sense. The caretaker hadn't been imagining things. The presence wasn't dangerous. It wasn't a threat. It was just here, stuck in a place everyone forgot, waiting for someone to listen. I felt the tension in my shoulders slowly ease. The abandoned place didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt peaceful, like I had finally reached the heart of it. I took a small step back toward the doorway, giving the present space. "I understand," I whispered. "I'm leaving, but I'm not leaving you alone. I'll tell people your story. This place won't stay forgotten anymore." The air grew warmer for a second, almost comforting, as if acknowledging my promise. I turned and stepped out of the room, leaving the journal open on the table exactly as I found it. The moment I closed the heavy door behind me, the tapping stopped. The hallway felt calm again, the kind of calm that comes after something important finally settles. As I walked back through the building, the earlier sounds were gone. No dragging, no breath caught in the dark, no flickering light. Everything was silent, peaceful. The abandoned place didn't seem haunted anymore. It felt like it had finally been heard. When I reached the entrance, I took one last look down the hallway. And that's when I noticed something that made me freeze again, not in fear, but in confusion. The faint trail of dust I had followed earlier was gone. Not disturbed, not overwritten, completely gone, as if someone had swept it away moments ago. The floor looked untouched, clean, like no one had walked through there in years. I stepped outside into the cool night air, trying to gather my thoughts. The building behind me stood silent, its windows dark and still. I took a deep breath, ready to leave the place with a sense of closure. But then, just as I started walking toward the gate, I heard something faint behind me. 3 soft taps. Not from inside, not from the hallway, but from right behind the entrance door, as if the presence wasn't guiding me anymore. It was following me. Only then did I realize there might have been more than one presence inside the abandoned place. And only one of them had shown itself. The other had stayed hidden, quiet, watching, still waiting for me to come back. The 3 soft taps at the entrance door followed me long after the sound faded. I stood still, listening, trying to convince myself it was only the old with settling. But deep down, I knew the difference. Some sounds belonged to the building. Others belonged to something inside it. This one felt like a reminder, a quiet sign that the abandoned place wasn't finished with me yet. I took a slow breath and walked toward the gate, putting distance between myself and the dark doorway. The night air felt lighter with every step, almost like I was crossing from one world back into another. But my mind kept replaying everything I had seen, the journal on the table, the faint presence standing behind me, the way the air warmed when I promised to tell its story. And now, this final tap at the door from something that never showed itself. I reached my car and leaned against it for a moment, letting the silence settle. The abandoned place looked harmless from a distance, just worn brick, broken windows, and years of dust. Anyone passing by would think it was empty. But I knew better now. It wasn't haunted in the way people imagine. It wasn't cursed or dangerous. It was just holding something unfinished: memories, attachments, pieces of people who never quite left. Before starting the engine, I pulled out my camera and replayed some of the footage. The earlier shots were clear, just the usual dark hallways and echoes. But then I reached the part near the narrow door. The moment the light inside flickered, the camera screen shook slightly, as if something invisible brushed past it. And when I paused the frame inside the small room where I found the journal, I noticed something I hadn't registered before, a faint blur near the corner, almost the same shape as the presence that stood behind me. It wasn't threatening. It wasn't looming. It was just there, like it had been waiting for someone to notice it for a very long time. I drove home slowly, keeping my mind grounded, trying not to overthink every detail. Yet the further I got from the abandoned place, the more the night felt strangely quiet, like something was missing. The kind of quiet that leaves too much space for your thoughts to wander. When I finally reached home, I sat in my room with a journal entry still on my mind. The caretaker had written about loneliness, about being the last one in the building, about hearing things that didn't always make sense, but never made him feel unsafe. I realized what I felt inside that building wasn't fear. It was connection. A strange connection, but still a connection. Something that wanted to be acknowledged, maybe remembered. For the next several days, I kept thinking about going back. Not to chase anything supernatural, but to understand the story more deeply. But each time I thought about returning, the memory of that final tap at the entrance door made me pause. The first presence, the calm one, had guided me. But the second one, the one that stayed hidden, I didn't know what it wanted. Maybe nothing harmful. Maybe just curiosity. But being watched without knowing who or what was behind the watching left a quiet chill in my chest every time I thought of it. Still, I felt responsible. I had said I wouldn't leave the place forgotten anymore. So I spent hours researching its past, searching old records and asking around town. I learned that the building once served as a small community center, classes, gatherings, late-night work sessions. People came and went, and many considered it a warm, welcoming place. But over time, funding dropped, the building wore down, and eventually it was closed quietly. The caretaker, as the journal suggested, stayed longer than expected, keeping watch until the very end. Some said he had passed away inside the building, peacefully, in one of the back rooms. Others said he left town quietly and never returned. No one seemed entirely sure. That uncertainty made the presence I felt make even more sense. It wasn't about haunting or fear. It was about the place holding onto the last trace of someone who cared about it. But what about the second presence? The one that never showed itself? I couldn't ignore it. The abandoned place wasn't only carrying the caretaker's memory. It held something else too. Maybe another person who had once spent time there. Maybe someone who left in a rush. Someone who didn't get to say goodbye. Someone whose story never made it into any record. Not harmful, but unfinished. I went back one last time, during the day, making sure I wasn't alone. The sunlight made the building feel different, less mysterious, more open, but still filled with echoes of the past. I walked straight to the hallway where the trail had appeared and disappeared. The floor was clean again, just like the night I left. I approached the heavy door where I found the journal, and even though I didn't have the key with me, the door opened with a gentle push. The journal was still on the table, untouched, its pages calm and settled. I flipped through a few more entries. Most of it was simple writing, daily notes, maintenance reports, small observations. Nothing frightening. Just a man documenting the last days of a place he didn't want to see fall apart. Before leaving the room, I spoke softly into the air, the way people do when they aren't sure if anyone is listening but hope someone is. Thank you for guiding me. I kept my promise. The air didn't shift. The temperature didn't change. There were no taps or flickering lights. Just the quiet stillness of a place finally being acknowledged. On the way out, I paused at the entrance door. This was where I heard the last taps, the ones that followed me into the night. I waited, listening, giving the unseen presence one more chance to send whatever message it had kept hidden. But there was nothing, only a gentle breeze brushing past the doorway. Maybe that was the message, silence. Maybe the second presence didn't want to scare me or guide me. Maybe it just wanted to be noticed, but not followed. Maybe it needed distance to settle whatever kept it there. I stepped outside, closed the door, and this time the wood stayed quiet. Driving away felt different now. There was no weight in the air, no lingering chill. Only a soft sense of completion, like the building had finally shared its story. And now it could rest a little easier. When I posted the video later, carefully edited, respectful, focusing on mystery and history rather than fear, I made sure to talk about the caretaker, the peaceful presence, and the feeling of connection inside the abandoned place. Viewers wrote comments saying the story felt emotional and calm, not terrifying. Some even said the presence felt protective, like it wanted the place to be remembered kindly. I never mentioned the second presence. Some mysteries are better left untouched, gentle reminders that not everything needs to be fully understood. Even now, when I think about the abandoned place until midnight, I don't feel fear. I feel something closer to gratitude. Not everything strange is dangerous. Not every shadow is meant to scare. Some places just carry stories long after the world forgets them. And sometimes, all they need is one person willing to listen.